All right, welcome back, guys. Our next guest, this is going to be a lot of fun. He's been to Africa for a safari 2 times, literally, first question we're going to talk about. And he's planning his third trip next year. He grew up in Iowa in a small city surrounded by corn and was a spelling bee champion. We're going to ask you what that final word was. And he plays pickleball, tennis, bike riding, and he recently got a trainer at Equinox. We all should be training. Head of business development at Ekimetrics, formerly SVP in global data and analytics at Estée Lauder companies, retired from there. Doug Jensen, good to see you.
Thank you, sir. Good to see you. Great to be
That's
on
the
the show.
title too, huh?
Yes, that's a long title.
Yeah.
It always has been. But essentially, I've always had a data and analytics job for most of my career, about 35 years in the marketing analytics space. And it's changed so much, right? Because we never thought of or used the term data science. And now that's really all anyone talks about. And I would argue data science and AI are the buzzwords today.
Yeah, and we're going to get deep into your journey and kind of where you got where you are because it's a fascinating journey, but I'm not going to let you get past. But do you remember what that spelling bee word was?
You should have prepared me for that question.
You don't have
What
to.
I would say is I was the kid that would open the dictionary, find a word, look at it, and then close it, and then look up in my head and recite what that spelling of that word was. So I was always fascinated by learning new words and learning words that even I didn't understand what they meant, but trying to put that in the context of I think it will make me smarter someday. And if that means I can have a good job and a good life and that's how I get there, that was the, little boy way of thinking about that, being
And
surrounded
that's
by the
Yeah,
cornfields.
that's brilliant. Though one of my daughters, she loves to read. She'll knock out a 300-400 page book in like a week and a half. And her other triplet sibling will always say, he's like, why do you read so much? And I always, same point you just made, I always argue like the more you read, you're, put in front of words that you've never known, you're increasing your vocabulary, but just expanding your mind. And that's kind of been your journey, right? Um, so let's kind of dive right in because small town Iowa boy. What's the city you're from?
The city's called Fort Dodge. It is a city about 25,000 people. It was essentially a fort that Lewis and Clark visited on their way to discover what they ended up discovering. So it was a day's journey from wherever the last place was, and it was a great place to grow up because it was safe, it was highly educated, very liberal at the time, and you felt like the world was anything and everything for you.
Mhm.
And the cornfields, whenever I go back to Iowa, what I feel is this sense of serenity that looking at corn as far as you can see gives you. So it was a great place to grow up. I wouldn't
Yeah,
take that
that's
back for
beautiful.
anything.
Yeah, and I have a I have a friend, college friend that was from Iowa, and same thing. We actually made the journey there to her hometown. Don't remember the time, but remember flying into Des Moines and driving probably an hour and a half. But same sense. It's kind of like when you go to the mountains or you go to the beach. It's just like the vast reach of corn is just like there's something soothing about it. So I love that you being from there mentioned that.
Yeah, soothing is a better word. Serene soothing, absolutely. And I feel calm, a sense of calm that now that I live in New York City, I often harken back to like, how did it feel to feel so calm and serene growing up there?
Yeah, because now you're in the complete opposite of calm and serene at any given point in day. Now, when you went to university, you double majored in statistics and journalism,
I
which
did.
we're going to dive deep into that. But where did you go to school? And
Yeah, I went to Iowa State University. It was the best school for both of those fields, and it was really because my siblings all went there. In fact, I remember wanting to go somewhere else, and my dad saying, "Well, you would be eliminating this path of your three siblings all having gone to the same school." So I love going there also because I was a quite shy kid and I was nervous about leaving my hometown. And yet, when I went to Iowa State, I'd already been there for 10, 13 years visiting my siblings in their dorms. So it felt like home. And it was a great place to go. The reason why I studied both is journalism is something I had a passion for, and I love writing, but I worried that I couldn't make a good living at it. And so I loved math. I loved statistics and ended up getting a second major, double major, bringing both of those, two sides of your brain together. And my first job was basically doing the work that I do now, which is using statistical models to measure advertising, which is a form of journalism. And it was my one job offer. I worked at Nielsen, and I couldn't be happier because it was the at the beginning of the measurement now known today as marketing mix modeling, which we'll get into in the
Yeah,
episode.
and it's so choosing journalism, yes, but statistics, that was probably, back in the day when you and I were in college. Not I'm not aging you, I'm aging myself, but
You
I
can
had a
age me.
few
It's
friends.
okay.
Yeah, I had a few friends that majored in statistics and on the IT side, and it it wasn't a thing. I don't want to say it wasn't a thing, but it wasn't the way that you kind of articulated and blended in the ad space to your earlier point. Like, yes, it was something, but it wasn't like the most important thing when making ad decisions as it is today.
No, and again, this is back when the measurement of advertising just started. I would say statistics before that was largely confined to the medicine or pharmaceutical spaces. And the idea of using statistics to measure advertising and later social media and every type of marketing you can do, that was newish. And I think that it was just the nature of being born at the right time and having that opportunity. I didn't know what I was walking into, and I'd actually can tell you, my first job, I'm sitting in a cubicle in suburban Chicago writing code, and I actually don't know what it's being used for. And so
Mm.
one of the first things that launched my career was raising my hand to say, I'm building these models, I'm printing out these spreadsheets, and I'm giving them to somebody else. And somebody else is actually talking to a client and solving business questions. And I said, I want to be the guy talking to the client and understanding the questions, and then coming back to the office and supervising people to do the models. And that's essentially what I did for the first part of my career.
Yeah, and brilliant on you too, because I feel like, not knowing you too well, but understanding that journalism side, you really wanted to be a storyteller that was backed by statistics and data. So what was there a moment in your life where you kind of fell in love with advertising and you saw, I really want to be around that? Or was it really just first job out of college was on the Nielsen side and you just said you were just curious?
I'd say I fell in love with measurement, broadly speaking, and that I could use mathematics and statistics to measure something, and that something tended to be what the clients of Nielsen were wanting to know, which is you're selling products in food, drug, mass merchandiser stores, which is what those clients were doing, and these clients are the ones everyone knows, so Procter and Gamble, Kraft, Unilever, and what they needed to know is, are their marketing efforts working? And so using the data that was collected to those stores and then augmenting that with the data of marketing and advertising, that's how the measurement system was born. And using econometric models or statistical models, then over like a 2 year period, you look for patterns in the data and you figure out what the story is. But the journalism part, I would say, really helped me in my career because, as you were just saying, journalism teaches you to do two things, I would say: storytelling, as you said, and then to be inquisitive, to ask why, and then to further ask why. And I've recently had an experience where a senior stakeholder at one of the companies I worked at kept saying that the trick to being a good analyst is to ask yourself why 5 times. And because the first time you ask it, you're just starting the process and you don't know what you don't know. And that's where I think the workplace can be fun, is when you have the ability to, or not the ability, but you're empowered to actually go deeper to ask those questions. And I think that's what senior stakeholders, senior marketing leaders want, is someone who can go deep into the data, uncover an insight that wasn't obvious, defend it with facts, with models, and then actually produce that recommendation that the business leader can then use. And that's what I've always been fascinated by, and I've always felt like I was pretty good at.
Yeah, and I have a big smile on my face because that's one of the mantras that I've always evolved my career is, like, asking why. Like, even as a young child, for me, it was always like, "Why do we do it this way?" So, it's something that, Doug, that I encourage our team often and all of our listeners. I'm like, the way things are today aren't necessarily the way they need to be in the future and even maybe next week or next month. So, um, I love that because the data side of things and where the statistical sides of things where you lived, asking yourself that question multiple times can then start to open up. If I'm asking the question why, it may be in a brainstorm or it may be something that's evolving, but in your universe of data and analytics, asking why can help unlock another ability to go deeper into that research and just say, well, we've always just kind of measured the mixed media model this way. But if you keep asking the why, then you're going to just keep digging deeper and deeper into the analytics. And in today's world of marketing mix modeling, I say it all the time, like it's super easy to be a CMO back in the day because it was like newspaper, TV, radio.
Traditional tactics, yeah.
If you had some extra money, buy billboards.
It is harder today, and one of the things I wanted to reflect on that you just said is that asking why is actually easier today, I would say, because of the sources of data. So the ability, for example, to go into social media and listen, or using social listening platforms to see what people are actually telling you and giving in verbatims to, comments to your product reviews or in just your posts that you do on social media. That data obviously didn't exist 30 years ago. And so when you were asking yourself why back then, you were basically at a loss. You probably had theories, but you didn't have a lot of data that you could use to support it. And so I'm excited for today's youth because at Estée Lauder, companies where I've previously worked, I had a team of 20 something analysts, and they all were super savvy at social media, and they could find that why pretty easily by just watching videos and hearing how influencers or creators would talk about a brand, and they could understand what worked and didn't work. And so I think the power of all of this is, I sometimes call it the power of big data with little data. So big data would be the models that you use with the hundreds of thousands of data points. And then little data are those nuances of understanding what individual consumers are saying and then bucket them into groups of conversations that make sense for you. So the power in anything, I would say, is combining the art and the science, or the big or the little data.
Yeah. Let I want to take a step back because our listeners are very broad and vast, and sometimes they're not in the ad space. So I want you to kind of give your own definition of marketing mix modeling and kind of what that means and what it means in our space. And obviously, we're going to go deeper into how it's evolved significantly from when you and I started in the industry.
Yeah, certainly. So marketing mix modeling is essentially a set of econometric models or statistical models that look for patterns of data. And typically when you do a marketing mix model, you're hiring an outside or external agency. For example, the one I work at now is called Ekimetrics. It's a Paris-based data science and AI company, also with presence in London, New York, Shanghai, and Hong Kong. And what they'll do for clients is take the client's data, typically 2 years of weekly data. And by data, I mean sales as an outcome, or things like website traffic or search. And we can talk later about the different ways you can look at that. But you're relating essentially an outcome, something you want to explain. So let's say it's sales, and what explains sales or what drives sales. So things like marketing, advertising, obviously the different components of advertising. So a lot of times marketing mix models can tell clients or brands what types of video programming work, what types of out-of-home programming work, so that the more granular your input data can be, the more insightful your results can be. And so at the end of the process of running a marketing mix model, you would find as a brand the insight into the incrementality, which means how much extra sales you'd get for the activities that you do, and then correspondingly the return on investment of those budgets that you spend against that. And so the ROI will tell you where's the best place to spend an incremental dollar, and or if I have to cut a given set of budget items, what's the best place to cut where my sales will be less affected. And it just starts there because there's so much more that you can uncover. I remember back in the day working on a cough medicine brand or a cough lozenge brand, and doing a marketing mix model and finding that the incrementality of their TV advertising drove incremental and really big increases in the spring. And we theorized it was because of the onset of allergies, but they were not marketing or messaging anything about allergies as a relief for the lozenge. And so the insight of just tabbing or just looking at the data across time uncovered an insight of demand that they had no idea was happening. And so that's just one simple example of the power of insights you can get from it. Today, marketing mix models are routinely used by major corporations in all industries to understand strategically how to spend their advertising and promotion budgets. And at Ekimetrics, for example, we have clients across all industries, and these are multi-million dollar engagements where really big corporations want to continually measure the performance, because you can use marketing mix models to test and learn. You can change amounts of spend. You can turn certain tactics off. You can double the spend on certain tactics, and the MMM will help you evaluate that. And you
Yeah.
can use that longer term.
Yeah. And I want to go deeper into that because obviously the question is in the early days, Doug's coming to XYZ brand that's hiring them, and the CMOs look at this data back in the day, and it was just kind of like, yeah, but intuitively, I know that, I'm gonna buy cough medicine during, or cough lozenges during a certain time of year, because intuitively we just know. How was it in the early days compared to where it is now, where people, they're not making decisions without that data. They're not they're not making decisions about creative, they're not making decisions about ad placement, and they're measuring every single component of ad campaigns. But in the early days, give our listeners a little bit more about how you had to help sell through that data, even though they were hiring you to
Mm.
analyze that data.
Yeah, well, it takes a certain smart individual in a brand leader to realize that they need help understanding and running their business. So, first, I would say a CMO, for example, who's inquisitive will be the best kind of client, right? Because they'll know that they need help, they'll know that they need to outsource this work, and they'll commission it. For example, a marketing mix model, and they'll see the results. The main difference, I'd say, between 20 years ago today is 20 years ago, your tactics were largely traditional tactics: TV, out of home, print and newspaper and magazines. And so there were less choices. Today, it's actually arguably harder to disassociate all the different elements, because, in social media, you can place ads on Facebook versus Instagram versus TikTok versus Pinterest versus Snap. And each of those platforms offers different ways to target consumers. So you're not always targeting the same audiences. So the complexity of measuring it today can be difficult, but I'd say the best analytics company that can do this will be able to defend the robustness and reliability of their models. And they'll be able to show over time that when they make a recommendation, and that's one of the things I've always prided myself on, is that I'm making a recommendation to a CMO as if I'm the CMO receiving the recommendation. So I would always think through, if I'm receiving this recommendation, what would I personally do with it? And if it wasn't granular or specific enough, I'd go back and get deeper into it, which is going back to kind of the why, which is to understand, like, what if I saw this, why would I think this, and what would I do about it? And I'd say, again, the CMOs who are using MMMs the most appropriately are inquisitive, open to change, and open to recommendations. The worst thing that an MMM can do for a company is to validate what someone already thinks, because it will only serve up that kind of insight to you if that's what you want. And then you can have groupthink and go down a road that's against what an MMM would be used for. I can tell you one story of a former company that I'm not going to name that essentially was starting to deteriorate its sales performance and chose to double down into a tactic that the MMM said would be the worst thing to do. And I was there saying, this is not the right decision. And they did it anyway because they thought in their guts it was the right decision. But later, a year later, McKinsey is hired to do a postmortem on why the business is continuing to suffer, and basically said they didn't listen to the MMMs that Doug was leading. So,
I
a
love
little
that.
bit of
It's like a
validation,
picture.
but not the right way to
Yeah, it's like
validate.
a picture of you on there, and it's like, I told you so. Love that. One of the points that you made, and sorry to keep harping back on this, but it's one of the intuitive things that I've picked up on you when I met you in Scottsdale was, there's one thing, and a good friend, become a good friend, but Paul Wilmington at Canvas Worldwide, he was on our podcast multiple times, and he's talked about this a good bit. Like, it's one thing to have such an influx of data to say CCY, but there's also different folks in the tier level, executive suite level, that he talks about on how you have to position this data, right? from a CFO, CEO perspective is significantly different, which I'd love for you to kind of dig deeper on with the data and analytics side of things compared to what the CMO is doing. Most of us that listen to this podcast know what the CMO and how he or she is using that data, but maybe share kind of like how you're positioning. Because again, what I've loved about meeting you multiple times is how you position the data, but how passionate you are about the storytelling of that data.
Yeah, certainly. So again, the CMO is probably the primary user of the results of an MMM to set strategy. And then basically their job is to sell that strategy to the rest of the C-suite. Where I've seen the most success in companies, both from the vendor side as well as where I've been inside, is that from a top-down perspective, the CEO and CFO need to be aligned that MMM is a tool that the company is going to use. And in the case of Estée Lauder companies, at the beginning of the work that I was doing with them, I can remember being in an executive committee meeting where I was brought in to introduce MMM as a topic that they hadn't ever done before. And the CEO, who had come from Procter & Gamble, said, so, hey, everybody, this is Doug, and we hired him for one of the reasons is to do this work for us. And I expect that you'll work with him because at Procter & Gamble, we use this routinely to make better business decisions. And it will tell you things like if you have to cut your budget, how to cut it so that your sales do not erode, if at all. And maybe even you could cut certain tactics and optimize so that you can actually cut your budget and grow sales. And so having that top-down support was a key success factor, but it was only the beginning, because what I ended up having to do is to convince people that I was there as a third party, even though I was internal, that I was objective, that I had no skin in the game, that I was there to provide a service, and that service was just to help them make better decisions. And even saying that out loud was just the beginning, because you have to be there year over year over year to let them know that you really don't have a vested interest, that you're really there to provide the best recommendation that you can provide. And any kind of engagement on MMM is going to be related to that. It's going to be a multi-year journey. And at Ekimetrics, we look and work with a lot of new companies who are new to this, and they think that it's all about the models. It's not. That the models are something that has to be done, but it has to do with the alignment and adoption. And I'm very passionate to be with a client to make sure that we talk about the success factors and we talk about what it means to be there every step of the way and make sure that everyone's in alignment. So I would say the CEO isn't the recipient of MMM. The CFO, however, is probably a right-hand partner to the CMO. And the smart CMOs bring their CFOs, as I said, right-hand partners to be there to receive the results of a project or a deliverable so that together they can assess what's going on, as opposed to the CMO receiving it only and then later going to the CFO who wasn't in the room at the time. And in my experience, some of the finance folks have been the best customers because they're the ones who are in charge of making sure the budgets are locked in and the allocations and the budgets are as smart and optimal as possible.
Yeah, makes sense. We're going to put a pin in that because I want to get to your career. So when you were at, because we're going backwards here, which I love, but so you were at Nielsen for quite some time working with CPG clients, and then you were at IRI for quite some time as well. But then where did you make the transition over to the brand side, specifically Avon Products, where you spent 7 years?
Yeah, so I started my career, as you said, at Nielsen, and that's now called Nielsen IQ, and then Information Resources, which is now called Circana. They merged or purchased another company called MPD. The reason why I moved to the client side is that even though I mentioned that I loved being client service oriented, and I didn't say this, but I loved the variety of companies and industries that I worked on, what was always missing for me was making sure that when I left the building or left the meeting, that people knew what to do when operationalizing the MMM. And so I decided to take the leap and go client side. As you said, Avon Products for 7 years and then Estée Lauder Companies for 12. So almost 20 years in beauty, really going deep in the beauty industry. And I think the benefit of that is when you're deep in a category and you live and breathe it, then you can understand more intuitively if you see an MMM or you see some other kind of analytics, what seems to make sense without even thinking about it. So for example, In the beauty industry, as you may know, influencers started to become pretty prominent about 10 years ago. And what we were seeing at Estee Lauder was a lot of small indie brands growing quite dramatically without paid media, without any other distribution increases, but primarily because of, let's call it word of mouth, or influencers or creators talking about a given brand. And so when we started to think about whether that was a relevant tactic for us, when we did the MMMs, we started to, do some tests and pilots and found that the ROI was one of the highest. And so it became something where, was that intuitive? Did that make sense? And it turns out that it absolutely did make sense when you're starting off in a tactic that, is growing quite dramatically. Other industries, other experiences may not show the same thing. So my point is going deep into understanding the beauty industry, what makes a beauty consumer think and purchase, and what are the things that go into that whole purchase journey are really important. And so going deep into the beauty industry was something that I relished and really loved doing.
Yeah, and it's such a, I don't want to use the word historical, but it's beauty's always been a product that's being used, but now it's expanded so largely. How, just out of my curiosity, because I know a good bit of what you're doing is marketing mix modeling at your time at Avon and Estee Lauder, but were you also utilizing that data and analytics and metrics to also make decisions on buying companies as well? Because that's a huge thing right now, is where D2C companies are getting swallowed up by major corporations. Was that same thought process being used there as well?
It can be. That wasn't my focus, although I would partner with the M&A folks. They tended to keep to themselves, meaning that they wanted to be separate from the regular business. But where I could go with that question is, MMM is only one tool in a toolkit or in a toolbox for marketers. And the way that I've always thought about it, being in-house at a beauty company or at any company, is your job is to answer business questions, full stop. And so what I would do is meet one-on-one with brand leaders and first go into them with, hey, I've been studying your brand, and here's some analytics that I think that you might find interesting, just to whet their appetite. And if they seem interested and they want to work with me, then I continue the conversation. And ultimately you leave the meeting with a set of questions that you get to then go study and bring back to that leader. And so the biggest satisfaction I've ever gotten is to bring in something that a business leader didn't know, and that
Mhm.
they say, thank you for that insight. I'm going to use it, and I want you to come back next time and teach the rest of my team
Continue it.
what
Yeah.
you're learning. And there, the journey can go anywhere analytically. I've always found marketing mix modeling a good tool because it's so strategic. Because what it does is it will take, as I said before, 2 years of data, but analyze the entire business. And so the idea of it is it should look at every factor. It should also assess the health of the business through a baseline. It should assess whether advertising, social media, TikTok versus any other platform, all of those things should be assessed. And what you get from it is this incredibly strategic set of recommendations that really drive your business. Is that the only tool that you can use? No, of course not. You can do brand health trackers, you can do customer journey analyses, you can do trial to loyalty analytics. All of those are other things that come to bear. And one of the best things that I've ever gotten to do in my career is invent those kinds of analytics to answer those questions. Because as I said, the main thing is your worth as an analytics person at any kind of large company, or any company for that matter, is, do you listen carefully to the
Mhm.
question? Do you do some kind of analytic that answers that question? And then do you stay with that business leader to make sure that they understand what to do, and that you're there for any follow up, and you're there to basically be a trusted advisor to them?
Yeah. Whereas some people may, or some teams and departments may look at you guys coming in as a threat. Like, why is someone second guessing what I've done for the last, especially when you're talking about CPG brands that are been around forever and ever. It's like, this is the way we've always done it. Like, my favorite is like back of the newspaper. Like, we've always bought back of the newspaper. We're a big box retailer and it works. And it's, so my question really comes around, or conversation really comes around, like media consumption. Like, it's significantly changed. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you could probably in a room of 1,000 people have everyone raise their hand on who reads a newspaper the traditional way
Mm-hmm.
compared to where they get their news today, or who are their trusted people where, catching up with my dad the other day, I was just poking around and I was like, well, who was your trusted person? He was like, well, the 5 o'clock news, Dan Rathers, like whatever he said, whatever came through the TV, that was the gospel. Well, today you touched on influencers. So the media consumption's changed. So obviously new, we'll call it media types have emerged. So maybe touch a little bit on, and side note, like out of home there is just now getting brought into the MMM model as well. But touch on how that process works, where an emerging media like social listening, like influencer economy, how how does that process work where it says, okay, this is a new media channel. We need to add this in and go.
So if you're doing an MMM annually, which we were at Estée Lauder, you would use the annual update to assess anything that was new. Of course, if something happened within the last month of that data period, then you'd say, hold on, I'm going to tell you about that for a year from now. TikTok Shop is a great example of that. And it's still relatively new. It's a commerce oriented platform. Does it drive halo onto earned media? That's one of the outstanding questions about it. But I've always said, use the MMM strategically, test new things that you want to try. Maybe they don't have to be a lot of spend. If you're spending $150,000, $200,000 on a given tactic, which may be a lot to some brands listening to this, but what I'm saying is don't spend millions on something that you're not sure of. Test it out and maybe do a match market test, but use those results and fold them into an MMM. So I've always been very careful to say whatever the MMM says, do I feel like it's got enough data, enough history, enough support that it's been executed such that we can make a verified recommendation from it? And we've also been really clear that if it's too early or it's too soon, that we'll say we'll wait till next year, or you, the marketer, should make a decision on investing in a given tactic preemptively so that you get ahead of whatever curve the consumer is on. Because as we all know, brands who get first on a given platform are going to win.
Mhm.
We studied this brand called Elf Beauty.
Yep.
It's a mass cosmetics brand run by some really genius people. They've been first to every platform that we've ever studied. And guess what? They are growing consecutive quarters for the last, 5-6 years. So being first to market on these emerging platforms, knowing where the consumer is going to go, is the thing that most brand people need to think about. The more you're sitting back and not sure, or you're sitting back and you say there's a risk, the less you're going to be likely to win. And so I've always liked working with smart marketers who have that mindset. I'm going to name drop Corey Marchesato at Elf Beauty. She's one of those people. If you listen to what she says on LinkedIn or any other podcast or platform, you're always going to find she's got the way forward because she's thinking ahead of where the consumer wants to be, and they're going to meet that consumer before the consumer really knows that they need to be there with them.
Yeah, and it's side note, I've met a few of the folks on the Elf team and brilliant folks. They were speaking at Cannes on a panel. I don't know if you were there the same day, but yeah, brilliant people and the passion that oozes from it. But I love what you're saying there is it's the mixed media model isn't the only way, but it's extremely important. But as these new brands, up and coming brands, they're finding more savvy ways with smaller budgets to figure out like, okay, where is the consumer at? Where's the rebellion consumer at? Last night my daughter had two of her best friends sleep over, and she was like, "Hey, can we stop at Walgreens real fast? We want to make this new um, lip balm product and that we saw on Elf's TikTok." And it was basically like blending the three Elf products in with Aquaphor. And then next thing you know, I get this whole entire TikTok video sent to me by Ellie, and it was the most comical thing in the world. But I dove back deep and I went and listened. I looked at my notes from Elf, and it was like they're reaching a 13-year-old girl audience in a completely different way than typical beauty products, their traditional way of advertising. So it doesn't surprise me a lot of these D2C brands are quickly figuring out like where are the true new consumers are at, whether it's influencers or folks like my daughter's cheer team all coming together and like creating something, and also Elf being $5 per
Yeah.
item.
What I was going to say is what else advantage is the accessible price points, but also really good quality products
Yes.
at those affordable price points. Like none of marketing works, obviously, if product quality isn't there. And I've always
Correct.
said people don't buy brands, they buy products. And your example is your daughter buying multiple different products to make essentially a new product
Mhm.
for themselves. And I bet Elf is watching that and saying we probably will repackage that or create that solution for the consumer in the future. But if your product quality isn't there, one of the things Estee Lauder always prided itself is really strong product quality. And a lot of the DTC indie brands that we initially were seeing growing because of influencers, they're not around today, largely because the product quality wasn't there. It got good trial, but it didn't get repeat. And so that's the important thing is you can't have this marketing muscle without the product quality being there, right?
And what in your time at Estee Lauder specifically, what because an iconic brand that continuously evolved but also stayed true to its product. What your 12 years there, how was it embraced? The analytics side of what you did, the MMM side of things of what you did, was it a continuous education that was happening internally within the smaller teams, or did you kind of educate, then move on, educate, move on? What was kind of the strategy and what was your focus and the team that you led's focus?
I think education is always important. It was always important for me to find the right stakeholder who would know what MMM is and that would use it. We were initially doing MMMs for the global teams, and then what we realized is that the decisions on where the marketing spending, where the media spending was being made was in the regions. So we quickly pivoted, and the region brand lead would become the main stakeholder. And those typical people are commercial, they're go to market oriented, they're practical, and they have experience leveraging MMM. So that was a pivot that we made. Generally speaking, Estee Lauder really embraced analytics generally in the product innovation area, which is what I wasn't working on. I was working on the go to market area. So what I would notice is that MMM became something we educated at first and became a regular deliverable for the people who needed it. And so when new people come in from the outside who are coming from the Procter and Gambles or Unilevers of the world, they know that kind of work is necessary. And so they're the ones that we gravitate towards delivering it to. But I think what was more interesting for me outside of MMM were all the ways you could use social listening and earned media analysis to really understand kind of trends and behavior. I'm a fan of a company called Creator IQ.
Mhm.
They are an influencer marketing technology. They coined this measure called earned media value, or EMV.
Mhm.
And most of the beauty brands and now most industries are using or leveraging that metric to understand and measure buzz essentially. So I think what we're seeing now that we didn't see 10 years ago is that buzz can drive brands growth. You want to have earned media value and the share of earned media value as a brand being higher than your market share. And the more you can do that, the more you'll grow your market share the next year. There's a guy named Connor Begley who's the co-founder of Tribe Dynamics, which Creator IQ bought, and now he's their chief strategy officer, and he talks extensively about this. So any listeners out there that want to learn more about the influencer space should go to Creator IQ's website, and they have podcasts with a whole host of brand marketers. I did 2 podcasts with them, proudly to say, and essentially it's a good way to understand buzz. It's a good way to understand how social media today really influences brand performance. And I'll tell you, Elf is one of those users of that kind of data.
Yeah.
But going back to kind of what we were talking about, I'd say the smart brand marketers of today are the ones who know how to use the tools and who will push the analytics people to get more precise about the analytics that they're delivering. And they're basically partners together. Like anything I've ever analyzed was never done for me. It was always done for somebody else who could make a decision, and that's what I got excited and proud of.
Yeah, I wanna dive into your new and this is a good segue, but I wanna dive into your new journey, your new career, at Ekimetrics, and but as we dive into that, you talk about, like, buzz and the importance of that. Are you familiar with the, Saratoga water and the influencer TikTok, Ashton Hall?
No,
So,
but
yeah, I'll
I'll
give
go
you the
look it up after this.
yeah,
I'm
it
a
is
avid consumer of social media. I'm a big Instagram poster. I'm on TikTok all the time, so
Yeah.
I use these tools in a way that other guys my age don't do.
Yeah, and this is a brilliant case study and a 101, and it's the Saratoga is a very high-end sparkling water, and Ashton Hall is a former collegiate running back, very fit guy, and his whole thing is his 350 what's your 3:52 AM? So he wakes up every morning and he does all these wild routines, but by watching his entire experience, every time that he wakes up at 3:52, he goes through the normal regiment. But one of the things that he always has is the blue famous Saratoga water bottle next to him. So by design, everyone would assume that Saratoga water is has him as a brand marketer.
Right.
Not at all the case. And the question really is around buzz, but Saratoga water saw, typical water, flat, normal spend along with everyone else. And then they saw this massive spike in sales. And they even found out that Ashton Hall, this very well known TikToker, influencer, health conscious person, had no affiliation. He just loved the water. There's also some side note in Fast Company and Business Insider that like this is a great way for influencers to get brands, and most brands would then call up that influencer and say like, "Hey, let's do a partnership," but they
Absolutely.
didn't, right? So what do you say to a brand in your new role and what you're doing? Like, "Hey, let's do some analytics behind this," and but they completely ignored him as a brand partner, and he was fine with it as well. But it's like this odd phenomenon that's going on right now in the social influencer world of just ignoring because they don't want their high-end brand to be mixed with some former athlete.
So the first thing is you need to know who's talking about you and who's talking about you organically, because those people who are talking about you organically likely love you,
Mhm.
meaning the influencers love your brand. And so you want to cultivate a relationship with them. And this is going to be a multi-year relationship. And you typically want to find those people, not the one that you just described, but another influencer or creator who might be younger, who might be in the target audience of your brand's customers, who is naturally already talking about you, featuring you, and basically, as I said, cultivate that relationship. But start it early when they have a lower follower count, as small as like 10,000 followers, and then nurture that relationship over time. One of the things that we did at Estée Lauder was to teach about that. We had an earned media training where we talked about taking our brands, the ones that were successful at it, to teach the other brands of what they would do. And it's multifaceted. There's not one answer about how to work with influencers, but it starts with that organic relationship that I talked about. Then it includes, gifting, sending product to influencers that you've heard talk about you, and then send them a gift with no strings attached to say, hey, we know that you've talked about us before. Here's a new flavor or a new shade or something new that's about what we already know that you like. And if you talk about us, great. But if not, that's fine too. And then maybe the ones that really are eager, you say, hey, come into our offices. We're going to give you an education talk so that you actually understand how we formulated the product and what ingredients are in it that you can then talk about if you want to. And all of this is even before any kind of contract would happen. And of course, then for the ones that you want to make really much bigger, you can do that. I think what was interesting for me over time is how TikTok upended working with influencers, because they're in TikTok, as you well know, someone with a virtually tiny following can blow up and have virality that the brand wouldn't know about because they would be too small of a follower count to be tracking. And then the question is, well, when someone talks about you and creates the virality, what do you do as a brand to react to it? And typically that means contacting that person, saying hello, asking to license their content. So that might be paying them some fee, and then saying we'd like to reuse your content and boost that content through paid media. And then you can really get it to fly. The best way to do all of that is to have an influencer marketing team. And so what I'm seeing is there are a lot of brands that I know. I have friends who are CMOs. I have friends who are CEOs, and they are running small brands, but they don't have that position. And one of the things that Creator IQ will say is you need like one person to reach out to 500 influencers. So imagine how many influencers there are that could talk about you. You could really invest in this, and that might be the best investment from an organization perspective that any brand can do.
Yeah. So last back half of the podcast, I want you to dive deep into Ekimetrics because who would have thought you and I talking about analytics would just go by so fast? But I love the importance of it, right? But you're now at Ekimetrics. I want you to kind of
Yep,
dive deep into that and
sure.
really what I've learned and kind of educated myself on, fascinated by the company and its roster of clients, which obviously that's why you're there. But the AI solutions and analytics and data, how that's another evolution point in your long journey on the side of MMM.
Yeah, it's exciting to be at a company that thinks about AI at the beginning of everything that they do. So AI, as it relates to bringing data together, I call that data wrangling. AI, as it relates to running models faster. AI that basically looks for patterns in data that you couldn't detect yourself. But more interesting for me is agentic AI, which is the idea of having an AI chatbot, or let's call it a chat GPT, in your website that's looking at the model results that were just presented. And you as a marketer can interrogate it by saying, I need to cut 10,000, I need to cut $1 million from my budget, produce a recommendation or a simulation that tells me the best way to do that. And you're just typing that in or even voice controlling that in. So that's where the future is going. And for Ekimetrics, it's already there. There are clients that are receiving deliverables not in PowerPoint slides, but rather these websites with really great graphics, but more importantly, this ChatGPT capability that lets them ask questions to the data. And it's protected. It's right. It's in a firewall, so no other client or no other company can see it. And it's based on the models that have been built for that client. That is something that exists today that we're just now starting to talk about. So Ekimetrics, as I mentioned, is a French-based company with relatively low awareness in the U.S. So one of the things that I've been thinking about is how can I help that? How can I be sending out to my network the fact that I'm here? How can I make sure that at conferences, this company has a large voice in the topic of MMM, in the topic of AI, in the topic of agentic AI? So it's an exciting time to be in a company who's so clear on its path forward, leveraging AI, where it's not just a buzzword as big data was before, but it's actually a utility, it's a technology. But more importantly, the agentic part of AI is going to be where the future is. I think in the future, all of us are going to be talking into our or typing into our devices and expecting answers and not caring where it comes from, but
Right.
expecting a very reliable, accurate answer. And in the area of MMM, we're doing that now.
I'm going to ask this question reluctantly because I'm always told by our measure and data analytics teams that like you can't rush data and results. But do you feel that AI is going to? I know MMM takes some time to actual get great results back or powerful, strong results back. At times, as you had mentioned, up to 2 years. Do you feel that AI is going to speed up that process?
It will. The 2 years that I was quoting is the time period that you're analyzing. What we didn't talk about is how long does it take to get that delivered. And one of the things that takes the longest time is just the data collection. So it can take up to 2 to 3 months just to have a client provide all the data that would feed a model. So I definitely think AI will speed up that process. I think that AI will also help in the quickness of how the models are done themselves. And then more importantly, once the results are delivered, then AI will be automatic, exactly real time, because you'll be able to type in this question and get an immediate answer because the data and the models are all right there. I think that MMM sometimes gets a bad rap for not being real time, but the way that I've always thought about it is it should be a strategic tool, and you can't run or you can't rush something that's looking through so many data points and just being so thoughtful. MMM to me should be something that you run every year, every half year, maybe every quarter if you want it to, but you can't expect it to be real time necessarily. But I do think that AI and the power of it could transform that thinking completely.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of clients expect to do things like MMM plus MTA, which is called multi-touch attribution, plus geotests. And I feel like when someone comes to a company like Ekimetrics with these three different kinds of analytics, they're basically trying to say, we're not really sure what we want to do, but we think that these are the analytical approaches that we want to have. And I hope that AI will help solve for that, because one of the reasons why I think they're doing that is they're either scared or they're not sure, that they don't know which approach is the best. We didn't talk about this, and there may not be time for it, but the way that I've always run marketing mix modeling is to do 3 different levels of it, using search as an upper funnel KPI, using website traffic as a middle funnel KPI, and using sales as a bottom funnel KPI. And the benefit to that is that you can measure marketing at the level at which it's meant to occur. Some marketing isn't meant to drive sales, it's meant to drive awareness or desirability. And using a multi-stage or a full funnel approach can solve for that. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is if you actually run a multi-stage approach, you don't need to do all these other analytics. You can just use that one tool. And that's what we were doing at Estée Lauder very effectively.
Yeah, and I love that. I definitely wasn't going to glaze over it because I know that's a big part of your expertise. And I would add another thing. I think a big factor in time is not everything is about marketing and advertising, right? We as humans, we have a crazy world we live in right now where global things are happening, both positive and negative, that also have influence on. So I I've learned to be patient with data and analytics because there's massive impacts that if you took just a small piece of time in a certain region or geography, there may be something positive or negative happening at that moment in time that could skew a model completely. And you just say, see, this is why we should never buy this media type with this product, with this influencer, because it just doesn't work and it's just skewed data.
Well, you're a smart man, and not everyone is as smart as you about how to think about receiving it. And I'm always interested in working with someone who has had experience with MMM because they'll know how to use it effectively. And to your point, you don't necessarily rush it. You're thoughtful about it. You're going through and letting an analytics company spend its time to measure it appropriately. And yes, we said that AI will speed that up, but we don't want to speed it up for the sake of speed. Because if you lose quality and you lose quality of insight, then no one wins. And I
Yeah.
think the strategic nature of MMM is the strategic recommendations that you can get from it. That's the power of it.
Yeah. And look, I could talk to you for hours about this because it's very fascinating. I now know why I was kind of drawn to you in the conversation in Scottsdale because you have truly done an amazing job where I've met a lot of data and analytics people where they're just very much like black and white, where you're very complex in how you're blending in the story and the purpose of the data and also understanding. And I love that you're at this point in your career now where you've it, from an outsider looking in, not knowing you well, is you're going where the future is headed. And what better way than couple yourself with brands that are not asking but demanding this? You know, we talked about the executive suite. Like there's very little decisions that are being made without a CFO sign off on data, and the CMO needs it for yes, the success of the brand and the company, but also say, hey, look, we use these models and they worked. So let's
Mm-hmm.
continue to evolve because it's, in my opinion, MMM's a living organism that's constantly changing and evolving. And I'm excited for you that you're at a company that's embracing AI first to make those more informed decisions for new brands and historical brands. As I kind of look at your client roster here.
Appreciate that, and I'm excited too. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, before we let you go, 3 safaris. This is like bucket list 1 in my entire life is a safari, let alone you're now going on your 3rd. What give our listeners as we let you wrap here, most favorite safari experience? What'd you experience? Did you go like glamping, the bougie route, or were you like deep into the Sahara?
So I'm a glampy, bougie kind of guy. I would say so. I've been on 2 safaris, as you said. One in South Africa near Kruger National Park, in the private lands that are to the west of that, and then a second one to the Serengeti. I would say, to answer your question, the most awe-inspiring experience was watching wildebeest cross a river together in mass. It was like a stampede. They're all like standing on the side of a hill, and all of a sudden they decide we're going to cross the river right now. And so they all go and do it incredibly quickly. And it's nature, because what you'll see is the alligators in the river trying to eat some of the wildebeest, and you're like, no, don't do that, cross the river. But then you're like, this is what nature is, and you see it live and witness it. So it's an amazing experience, and if anyone has the chance to do it, And I'm being selfish, I guess, to do it a third time. But yes, it's something that I'm treating myself to in this life. Yes.
Well, I'm with you. If I ever went on this safari with you, I'd definitely be on the glamping and make sure. What's kind of a bucket list on the safari that you haven't seen yet?
I haven't seen the animals in the delta. So my next safari is in Botswana, which is basically both land and water because the water comes into the delta and floods it, and you get to see different things that are water-based safaris, but you see some of the same animals. So just a different way to look at that. And maybe ultimately going into a safari in like Namibia, which is in the desert, which is a different type of safari. I feel like people need to explore the world. One of the things I've always done is been inquisitive to say we need to get out of our homes. We need to travel. When you travel, you learn about yourself and you learn about how to deal with other people, which has served me well in having a couple of global roles where it's being sensitive to others and their cultures that's important. And that's what you learn from travel, including safari.
I love that. Side note, if you ever want to do, I haven't done it yet, but it's my wife refuses to go on the safari, but the alternative is in Africa. There's a handful of like hotels that cater towards it, and there's one called like the Giraffe Hotel where giraffes will literally come up to you and
I've
in
seen that.
their environment. Yeah. So
Yeah, awesome.
good. Well, look, I'm beyond excited about the next journey. I'm even more excited about where data and analytics are heading. Again, embracing AI and having real time metrics and data is key, but also keeping that methodical historical element to it. So yeah, I'm excited about your journey and definitely have listened to the podcast that you recommended, and very grateful for me and our listeners for you being on as well.
I'm grateful that you had me. Thanks so much.
All right, take care, my friend.
Okay.